Hello, welcome to the Bigger Truth Show. I am Scott McMahon, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad that you're here. And today's going to be a big show. I am going to be all next week. I'm going to be in Oklahoma, and I've got a, a bit of a plan as far as how the show is going to go next week. We will still be doing lives on Monday, Wednesday, Thursday at 3 p.m. Pacific time. Monday, I think I'm going to do a pre-recorded show just because I'm going to be traveling into Oklahoma that day, and I'm not exactly sure what my schedule is going to be like on Monday. So, and then I we'll kind of see how the rest of the week unfolds, but I will be here, so you can tune in. And also, I'm doing something today that I even 2 weeks ago, before I started the show, I would not have done, which is I'm going to dive into the Jack Smith information, the filings that were just done. And the reason why I wouldn't have done this before I did the show is because this is something that I would have wanted to spend about a week thinking about before going live with. However, when I look at, because of my schedule next week, there's no way that I could get to this next week. So I am, and the reality is I've been researching this stuff for 9 months. So there were some things that I saw in the filings that I could talk about probably very uniquely. I don't know that there's anyone else who has done as much research and can talk about this. There probably are, actually. I think Vision Surreal probably could, if you're watching Vision. Um, but you have a different political perspective. So I think that I can uniquely talk about this. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started. First, this is just a reminder to me to help promote my merch. I'm wearing this shirt right now. For I think all of my shirts, the ones that I bought anyways, are I didn't go with just like the cheap, the basic shirts. These are a nice material. They're soft. It's a durable feeling material. It's actually one of the nicer shirts that I bought, and I think it's organic. I don't know. I used to care about that back when I was a hippie, but I don't anymore that much. But they're just, it's a nice shirt. Like it feels nice, and so it's not just a cheapo t-shirt, but um, and I think they look pretty cool. I like the logo, and I've gotten some good feedback from it. So all my merch is there, biggertruth.myshopify.com, and also my Substack is biggertruth.substack.com. And if you're not a paid subscriber, hop on over for $5 a month. Is a great way to support my work and to support this show. And on Fridays, I do a members only Q&A kind of podcast that's tends to be just a bit of a shorter presentation, but I will answer whatever your questions might be tomorrow, Friday at 3 p.m. same time for members only. So for paid subscribers only. So you can join that there. Now let's go ahead and dive right in. So this is Jack Smith, and I haven't done a ton of research on Jack Smith. I've just seen what has been reported about him. And it is very clear that he is a partisan. He has an agenda, and he was selected for that purpose. So it is, having read what I've read of the filing, and I have not read all 165 pages of it, but I have read a lot of excerpts from it. And where I've focused my time is on X, looking at what Democrat pundits are saying are the most salacious and important aspects of this filing. And so that's what we're going to go ahead and dig into. But it is pretty clear that he has an agenda, and he is very forcefully trying to promote that agenda, which is an agenda clearly to hurt Trump politically. And this, when I read what I've read here, I'm not seeing anything that even remotely looks like a crime to me. And I think this is really just a political hit piece. I do not see, people are, these Democrats are saying Trump's going to jail. And they've shown that they're willing to put political prisoners in jail, and it's, we'll see. even hear how he defends Jack Smith defends Brazil and the outright communist faction that has taken over Brazil in his filing. So this is where he's coming from, and um, it really sucks that in the United States of America, our government is being the power of our government is being weaponized against a presidential candidate and the American public. It sucks. This is. I read The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn a couple years ago, and if you haven't read that, I really recommend it. It is just stunning, and his writing style, I love. He's just a joy to read, even as he's talking about terribly dark things. He's got a tremendous sense of humor, and um, he's just a very gifted writer. So I definitely recommend reading that. But it shows exactly how this happens, and it is jaw dropping how similar it is to what is happening, not just to Trump, not just to the J6ers, but really in so many different ways in our society. The way that people, it, it, I don't really use Facebook. I've got a friend that is just a sweetheart of a person, Pat Johnson, who's helping me with my Facebook, and I wouldn't be on Facebook if it weren't for Pat. And so if you're on Facebook and you like seeing my content on Facebook, you should thank Pat. Um, but I hear from so many people that use Facebook that they are censoring themselves because they know that Facebook's going to censor them. So that is having an effect on people's minds and on what they say. And it's terrible. All right. So let's just dive in here. Um, so this is one section, and they have every name in here is redacted throughout the whole thing, and some of the names have been published, and so where I know one of these, either P14 or 15, is Jared Kushner, I believe. So blank was an, and I'll just read this because I think it's this gives a window into what Jack Smith's up to here. Blank was an assistant to the president and director of Oval Office operations. At trial, the government was illicit from will elicit from blank. I'm not sure if this is, so they're saying that they're going to have this person testify that he witnessed an uncompromised comment that the defendant made to the family members, in which the defendant suggested that he would fight to remain in power regardless of whether he had won the election. So Jack Smith here is claiming that uh, that President Trump said that he would fight to remain in power regardless of whether he had won. So saying that he doesn't care what the actual outcome of the election is, he's going to remain in, fight to remain in power like a tyrant. This is what he's saying. This is kind of the foundation, from what, as far as I can tell, of his whole filing, is this idea that Trump is a tyrant who was trying to put forward a coup and doesn't care about what the actual will of the people was. That's the way this is being presented. That's the way the media on the left is presenting the whole thing. And look, he's just a tyrant. How could you vote for somebody like this? And so then it says, specifically following, this is his evidence, specifically following the 2020 election, while aboard Marine One, the defendant told his wife, daughter, blank, daughter, oh, so this would be Ivanka, and son, or Ivana, and oh my gosh, you know which it is, and son-in-law Jared Kushner. So P13 is Jared Kushner. It doesn't matter if you just won or lost it doesn't matter if you won or lost the election, you still have to fight like hell. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you won or lost, you still have to fight like hell. He's not saying you still have to stay in office. That's not what he's saying. He's saying you still have to fight like hell. And um and that is, I think that's a true statement. It doesn't matter if you win or lose, keep fighting. And that doesn't mean he's saying that he's going to stay in office, but they're saying that that's what he's saying. So I'm going to make this one a little bigger so I can read it. Um, this says at 224, this is a later on, much later, this is page 80. At 2:24 p.m., Trump was alone in the dining room when he issued a tweet attacking Pence and fueling the ongoing riot. So this is uh, on January 6th in the afternoon, and while they call it, of course, they call it a riot. Um, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution. This is Trump's tweet that he's calling an attack, right? So, I mean, he's using inflammatory language, trying to suggest that there's some sort of a speech crime here or a thought crime that Trump is committing. Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth. And the as I have looked at what happened after the 2020 election, and I've looked at what Glenn was doing and Byrne and 1AP and the First Amendment Praetorian and this whole operation that was based out of the Willard Hotel in Washington D.C. And what Bannon was doing at that time. I was a huge fan of Steve Bannon, and I did not miss an episode. From I started watching Steve Bannon. I watched from the very beginning. I started watching just a couple weeks after he started, when it was called War Room Impeachment, and it was during the impeachment. And um, and that was with Jason Miller and Raheem Kassam is how he started it. And I started watching because I like Jason Miller more than even Bannon or Hasim or Kassam. But um, yeah, so I remained. I was a big fan. I never missed an episode. I'd listen on 2.5 to 3x speed every day, and so I could watch all 3 hours of his show, skipping the ads in about 40 minutes or so. But I watched every single episode for about 2 years, and and I remember this time very, very clearly, um, and how what he was doing. And I've gone back and watched a lot of those episodes as I've been kind of reviewing this time. But as I've looked at this whole thing, what I see generally is that Trump was infiltrated way more, and I think you'll see this as I go on with this episode. Trump was infiltrated way more than we know. He was so his campaign and his team that he he was surrounded by people who were compromised. Some were compromised, as I'm going to show, by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. Some were compromised by the Kochs, the Koch brothers, who very clearly hated Trump. They spent almost $900 million in 2000 in the 2016 cycle, and they never obviously endorsed Trump. And I'm not sure exactly how much they spent in the 2020 cycle, and they clearly were opposing Trump. But what they got for all that money is serious infiltration. Pence was their guy. Mark Meadows, he had a long history with the Kochs. Mike Pompeo had a long history with the Kochs. The Reince Priebus, and it was Reince Priebus and Mike Pence who selected the cabinet. Trump actually delegated to them to allow them to select the cabinet, and in 2017. So basically, the Kochs had the cabinet, and they also had another key player that we're going to talk about because it comes up in here, and that's Mike Roman, who was Trump's the director of election day operations for Trump Victory, which was also RNC. So he was reporting directly to Ronna McDaniel. And so what I see, and the way I see this is, and I think it'll become more clear as I show what I have to show here, that these these infiltrators within Trump's orbit, his campaign and his administration, were all working in various ways. Some of them knew about it and what they were doing, and some did not. But they were all working in various ways against his interests. And in a similar way to what I've shown with Tina Peters, who is in sentencing right now, and at any time, probably even during the show, her sentencing will be announced. And similar to what I've reported on with Sean Taylor in Tennessee. and certainly with Stacey Burke. I think that they were doing the same thing to Donald Trump, to President Trump. And Stanley McChrystal certainly was doing that starting in 2020 with Defeat Disinfo, that he was working very closely with, which was a military intelligence operation, very well funded, very sophisticated military intelligence operation against primarily against President Trump to deceive him about the vaccines, about everything COVID. That's what Defeat Disinfo is all about. And Stanley McChrystal is working intimately with that. And Stanley McChrystal, uh, at his home, was the registered address for the Flynn in or the Flynn. Uh, it was the Flynn Intel Group, which was his. After he left the DIA, he formed the Flynn Intel Group, which was his consulting practice that, and he had a division of that called Flynn Cyber that I've talked about a little bit, and I'll talk about more in the future. And but the Flynn Intel Group was registered at Stanley McChrystal's home address, and Flynn I've read a lot of reports on how on Flynn's service and how he really attached himself to Stanley McChrystal on January 11th, September 11th, 2020 or 2001. So for the next 10 years of his military career, the last 10 years of his military career before he joined the DIA, he was working directly with Stanley McChrystal. They were very good friends. And so Stanley McChrystal was running. He was very on a very high level working with Defeat Disinfo, which was also it's all these operations, various psychological operations against President Trump and the American public, and that's what was going on after the 2020 election. So I'm biting off a lot here. I'm trying to eat the whole elephant all at once with this that I didn't have as much time as I would have liked to plan, but I think I've got enough here to show you. So let's read on. Um, so President Trump wrote this tweet saying Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones, which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth. And the reality is, yes, I think even still, we have never had the investigation that the American public deserved into what actually happened in 2020 in that election. And I don't know if we ever will. And I think that all of the people that have said we need to fix 2020 before we can move on to 2024, uh, that was a psyop because I don't think we're ever going to fix 2020. We just have to be able to move on and try to fix the country, and it's going to take decades. There's not a quick solution. The Also the people that have said that the most have been working against any hope and working to thwart any hope of a real investigation into what actually happened in 2020, by discrediting it, by acting like fools, quite frankly, by disseminating lies. And look at Mike Lindell and everything that Mike Lindell has ever said and done since 2020. He has been wrong at every single point. He has been wrong. Look at his cyber symposium. It was such a joke. He is wrong at every turn. And so that what and I think that that was all deliberate. I believe that Mike Lindell set up Tina Peters, and I showed that in depth in there's a podcast on my Substack. Tina Peters was set up. You can look it up. So that's kind of my view there. I think Trump was right. I don't. Is there anything illegal in what Trump said in that tweet? Is there even anything wrong that he said in that tweet? He's saying that the American people deserve an actual, um, real investigation. That he's saying that we should not certify that it shouldn't be certified. So let's move on. This but of course, Jack Smith's calling it an attack, and he goes on, he actually spills pages on it. How it's an attack, and this is an attack on pets, and they were trying to he's accusing Trump of running psychological operations against Pence, but I just don't see it. Here's a part of that, and this is where it starts to get really interesting. On the evening of December 23rd, after CC1 is Giuliani, after CC1 shared CC2 and CC5's plan with the defendant, and I don't know who CC2 and 5 is. The defendant publicly retweeted a document called Operation Pence Card, which, like CC2's memorandum, advocated that Pence should block the lawful certification of the legitimate electoral votes. So, of course, he's adding two really key adjectives here: lawful and legitimate. And, uh, that's because Jack Smith is doing what he can on his side to prevent an investigation into happening. So, what's interesting here is this Operation Pence card that Trump retweeted. This is just an example of how deceived Trump was at that time. Ivan Raiklin was the impetus of the Operation Pence card. That was Ivan Raiklin's creative work, and Trump retweeted it. So, Ivan Raiklin has always been extremely adjacent to Flynn, like really Flynn's right hand man. He's now on the board of directors for America's Future, which is the Flynn family 501c3 nonprofit, and he's been on Flynn's right hand side on the stage with Flynn through in most of his movie screenings. Often now he's doing them himself. Ivan Raiklin is doing the screenings of the Flynn movie. So Trump shared Ivan Raiklin's work, and it's not only his. He shared OANN's work and One American News Network, and I believe that they were running a military operation against Trump then as well. Now, this one is very interesting, and this is something that what I'm about to share with you here, I'm very confident that you're not going to see this anywhere else. So this right here is at first it sounds it sounds very incriminating towards, I think, especially it's Chatworth, I think it was, and who was the Speaker of the House in Michigan. So I'll go ahead and read it. In mid-December, the defendant spoke with RNC committee woman, this is Ronna McDaniel, and asked her to publicize and promote a private report that had been released on December 13th that purported to identify flaws in the use of Dominion machines in Antrim County, Michigan. Ronna McDaniel refused, telling the defendant that she already had discussed the report with P38, who I believe, I think I'm blanking on his name. So many names in my head, but it was the Speaker of the House. I think I want to say Chatworth, or Chatfield. I don't know. If you're watching live and you can correct me, please do. But he was the Speaker of the House at the time. He ended up resigning when it came to light that he had some sexual improprieties. And but he said so that he said that he told Ronna McDaniel that the report was inaccurate, and he conveyed to the defendant, to President Trump, Chad Chatfield, I think it's Chatfield's exact assessment that the report was effing nuts. Chatfield. Thank you, Lauren. All right. It was Chatfield. So Chatfield's exact assessment of the Antrim County report was that the report was effing nuts. Now, often that is attributed to Matt DePerno because Matt DePerno was the original attorney in that case. However, he did not write that report. As has been reported elsewhere, and he, as soon as really Matt DePerno got the only real victory before January 6th in terms of election integrity, and that was a judge granting him the right to investigate the Dominion machines. And this was in Antrim County, where a large number of votes, I think it was 3,000 votes, that were supposed to be Republican votes flipped to Democrat votes. And apparently it was human error. It was not the machines that did it. It was not algorithms, but that's what these people really promoted. But as soon as Matt DePerno was granted discovery by the judge, within hours, Mike Flynn himself was on the phone with Matt DePerno, and he flew out um, on Patrick Byrne's private jet, arrived in Antrim County the very next day with these three people and some others. And so these three people on the left is Jim Penrose. Jim Penrose was the chief hacker. He was the head of cyber defense for the NSA. He left the NSA in 2014 when and retired from the NSA at the same around the same time that Flynn left the DIA. I don't know if they were friends at that time. I'm sure they knew each other. Um, but they certainly knew each other in 2020, as Jim Penrose was a key role in the ASOG group. ASOG was Allied Security Operations Group, which was his Russell Ramsland um, and others were leading this, but this was really Flynn's special operations group to investigate the machines. On the right here, we have Conan Hayes. Now, Conan Hayes, of course, is the gentleman that Tina Peters lied and used Gerald Wood's identity to sneak him into the so-called trusted build in Mesa County, Colorado, which is what she's most likely going to be going to prison for. And we will find out today about whether she's going to prison. But that is Conan Hayes, and Conan Hayes's role was to get these to capture a forensic image of the machines and or servers, and he did so from what I can tell in at least 4 states. Did it with Antrim County, he did it with in Georgia in Fulton County, he did it in Mesa County, and I believe he also did it um, in Nevada, and also there I shared before text messages between Stephanie Lambert and I think it was Doug Logan from Cyber Ninjas that said that where they were texting with each other and said that Conan Hayes had shared the Arizona images as well. So um, I or no, I'm sorry, I take that back. He shared the Georgia images with people in Arizona. So it was at least 4 states: Georgia, Michigan, Colorado, and Nevada, where he got these forensic images and then he shared them. And and in so doing, got a lot of people in a lot of trouble. And in fact, I believe, and Matt DePerno has been indicted by the attorney general. Those indictments came while he was running against her, while he was running for attorney general against her. So the current attorney general, while she was attorney general as an incumbent and running against Matt DePerno, indicted her political opponent for doing what these people actually did. And it's crazy. It's just crazy. Um, so the man in the middle here is another co-author of this report, and his name is Todd Sanders. And I have not been able to get any sort of background check on him. I cannot find him. I don't know if that was even his real name, but I have heard allegations that I find credible, even incredible, but the source is credible. That he and Christina Bobb were dating. Now you look at this picture and I'll pull it up. So he does not look like somebody that would be in Christina Bobb's league. And he was, yeah. Um, but he was actually living with Christina Bobb at Mar-a-Lago at the time of the raid, the FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago. It's pretty shocking to me, and he's a Flynn guy. So Flynn had a a mole essentially at Mar-a-Lago at the time of the raid. I don't know what the significance of that is. This is all alleged. This is a very difficult thing to verify, but I do believe that that is likely true. So these are the men that wrote that report, and they are the reason why it is effing nuts. And it was this is they just as they set up Tina Peters, just as Jim Penrose was involved in trying to set up Stacey Burke, and he was. And just as Jim Penrose was also working with Liz Harris on this is crazy. Jim Penrose was working with Liz Harris on the managing the data in the spreadsheets for her canvas. Um, and Jim Penrose also with you may recall a story about that this is where Stacey Burke first came on the scene with all this stuff was this story about a a worker at a mail routing warehouse that reported that there were multiple bags after the election, like huge containers of ballots that were being shipped even days after the election. And Jim Penrose actually met her, and and there I'll probably do a show just about this, but apparently he met her as she was leaving work with some First Amendment Praetorian guys and took her to a hotel, basically allegedly kidnapped her, took her to a hotel for 2 days. Finally, she just demanded to leave and they let her go. So they may say that they didn't take her against her will, but they put in her the fear of the government coming to get her, and so they were going to they were going to protect her by bringing her to a hotel so she would be safe. And then they he tried to get her to sign an affidavit about it, the whole thing. So Jim Penrose had a very key role in so many different aspects of this whole operation. And he's the reason this is all part of the setup against Trump. That he's the reason why that report was effing nuts. I think that had Matt DePerno written it, it would have been a very, very different report. And um, and there's a lot of stories around that that we'll look into at another day. I hope to be able to tell Matt's story in greater depth. Um, so another example here, and it says in the immediate post-election period, while the defendant claimed fraud without proof, or she's saying without proof, his private operatives sought to create chaos rather than seek clarity at polling places where states were continuing to tabulate votes. Now, here he's saying his private operatives. So, like these are Trump's hitmen. This is really important. For example, on November 4th, so this is the day after the election, P5. Now, who's P5? I was asking some people who's P5, and then Craig Mauger, thank you, Craig Mauger, put out a report this morning saying that P5 was Mike Roman. And I did a whole report on Mike Roman, and I'm going to share that with you in just a minute. So, but I can tell you that Mike Roman was not working on Trump's interests, and we'll see more of that. I did this report 3 or 4 months ago, so this is pretty wild. So, for example, on November 4th, Mike Roman, a campaign employee, agent, and co-conspirator of the defendant. So he's just asserting Jack Smith is saying a campaign employee, meaning he worked for the RNC. So it was actually Ron McDaniel that was signing his paychecks. He was the head of election day operations for the RNC. And he's not an attorney, by the way. He acts like he is, but he's not. A campaign employee, agent, and co-conspirator of the defendant tried to sow confusion when the ongoing vote count at the TCF Center in Detroit, Michigan looked unfavorable to the defendant. There, when a colleague of the TCF Center told Mike Roman, "We think a batch of votes heavily in Biden's favor is right." So this is when this is when there was a huge batch, like it was over 100,000 ballots that came in at 4:30 in the morning. They're almost exclusively for Biden. And Mike Roman responded, "Find a reason it isn't. Give me options to file litigation, and even if it is." Um, when the colleague suggested that there was about to be unrest reminiscent of the Brooks Brothers riot, a violent effort to stop the vote count in Florida after the 2000 presidential election, Mike, and this is where you could just tell this is written for the public. This isn't written for the judge. Mike Roman responded, "Make them riot. Do it." And I think Mike Roman actually did say these things. The defendant's campaign, hang on a second here. The defendant's campaign operatives and supporters used similar tactics at other tabulation centers, including in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the defendant sometimes used the resulting confrontations, blah, blah, blah. So he's doing everything, Jack Smith's doing everything he can to tie this to Trump, right? he's saying that this is Trump's doing. Mike Roman was working on Trump's behalf. But let's look at this report. And this is in the archives. So this is just another reason to join my Substack so that you can see it for $5 a month so you can read my archives because I've got a lot of good research in the archives. So I published this on July 10th, 2024. And um, the headline is Mike Roman set us up. Operative within the 2020 Trump campaign with ties to General Flynn and the Koch brothers caused Michigan alternate electors to be indicted. So in this report, I go into I it's I don't it's fairly lengthy, but I'm covering quite a bit of details. This is Mike Roman right here, and he is a indicted co-conspirator in the Fulton County case. So that's his mugshot. But Mike Roman was a Koch operative. In fact, and what I showed is that Mike Roman ran a private intelligence organization for the Kochs in uh, 2015. But even bigger, Mike Roman very clearly set up the alternate electors in every state where they've been indicted, including in Michigan and I believe including in Arizona. And I've shared this with the alternate electors in Arizona, but they all have a bias against me because they're all friendly with Shelby Bush and Carrie Lake and Caroline Wren, but and they just don't want to be on their bad side, and so they see me as toxic because the insurgents have taken over the state party there in Arizona. However, I would love for them to see this, and I think that this, I'm not an attorney, but it seems to me that this ought to help them. And so this is a text message that was released in the Michigan court case with the alternate electors. And these alternate elector court cases are where or the story there, if you're not familiar with it, is that um, the Republican Party state parties assigned a slate of electors for Trump in the event that um, the election results were overturned in court, um, or that things had gone differently on January 6th, and Pence had said, "Okay, well, let's have an investigation. Let's let the state legislature decide," something like that. So these were alternate electors that would have cast their vote for Trump in the event that something happened. Now, Hillary Clinton did the same thing, very similar in 2016. In fact, even more so, they did everything they could to threaten and intimidate all of the Trump electors into not voting for Trump. Um, the Democrats have done the same thing multiple times, and yet, of course, here we have the tyrannical deep state doing everything it can to just intimidate Republicans and against standing up against against their what they do. It's rules for thee, but not for me. And so what they're saying is that they were fake electors. They call them fake electors, not alternate electors, and that they are accusing them of trying to overthrow the election results. So in Pennsylvania, they're not indicted. And Pennsylvania is Mike Roman's home state. In Pennsylvania, the alternate electors were not indicted because there was a clause in the form that they signed that was presented to the National Archives and to the to Congress that and in um, that clause it was an indemnification clause essentially. It said that in the event that this that what they were doing, they were presenting themselves as electors for Trump in the event that it could be proven that they would not be or that Trump had actually won that state. And so this is a text exchange between Kenneth Chesebro, who's one of Trump's attorneys, who I think was one of the good guys, one of the few. And he says, "Mike, I think the language at the start of the certificate should be changed in all the states. Let's look at the language carefully." So he's saying that the language should mirror Pennsylvania. That's what he meant. that we should have all the states be like Pennsylvania. That way it keeps them out of trouble in case something happens. And Mike Roman responds, I don't. And kind of says, I can help with drafting in a couple hours. So he says, I can just do it. Let me do it. And then Mike Roman responds, F these guys. And he's like, just placate Pennsylvania? Okay. I don't know why, from what I understand, Mike Roman is a pretty intimidating fellow. And, you kind of get a picture of that here. And he clearly was trying to intimidate people at TCF Center in Detroit. And it's very clear that he wanted them to get in trouble. I mean, that it's very clear from this little text message exchange that he wanted them to get into trouble. And he worked very closely Mike Roman, he worked very closely, as I went on in this report, um, with Sean Flynn. Sean Flynn is not related to Mike Flynn, is at least not directly. He might be like third or fourth cousins, but from the background checks that I did, he's not first or second cousin or nephew or anywhere that I could see. Um, so there may be a relation, but it's distant enough that they're not really family. However, he is one of Flynn's attorneys, and his partner Jesse Banal is Flynn's primary litigation attorney. And until I actually removed him as a member a few weeks ago, he was a paid subscriber of my Substack, and you can see how often, which emails people open and stuff like that. So I've been looking at what he was opening. He was getting more and more active in opening, and there were some of my posts that he had opened many times, and so I could tell he was looking for dirt to try to sue me with. So I went ahead and just unsubbed him. Um, and maybe you're back. If you're back, Jesse, welcome. Bring it, whatever. I can't stop you. But I definitely would look forward to the asking the general some questions that he does not want to answer. So we'll see what happens. Um, in any event, so that shows one connection there. He was working very closely with Sean Flynn. Sean Flynn's actually the one that came out to Michigan to have the alternate electors sign the document. He was the one that closed the deal essentially. And um and there we go. And then after January 20th, what was Mike Roman's first job? It was for the America Project. How about that? So Mike Roman, very connected with Flynn and the Kochs, both of whom were working very actively against President Trump. And as we have here, uh, he was also working very aggressively and assertively and with direction. Was he receiving direction to act this way? To say these things, to make sure that he was heard saying these things, to act as if he was saying these things on behalf of President Trump? This is not Trump's doing. This is an operation against President Trump. He said, we think so. He said, find a reason that it isn't. Give me options to file litigation. He says, make them riot. Can you? President Trump never said anything like this. And that's their problem. They have to stretch. This is all a very coordinated operation to take out Trump. All right, let's go on here. So now we're going to move into another operative, and this is where it gets even crazier. So I'm sorry, I'm supposed to not say the word crazy. I had a very wise counsel tell me that I shouldn't say the word crazy so often. So um, it's going to get even more shocking. How about that? So by October 2020, P1, person one is, of course, Steve Bannon. Of course, he's person one, right? And he is because so much as you're going to see so much of Jack Smith's whole case revolves around Steve Bannon representing Trump's thoughts. And so what I'm going to propose here over the next 15, 20 minutes or so is that Steve Bannon was actively working, he was compromised by the CCP and working against Trump. And this may be very shocking to you because it has not been reported. And I don't know why. I think the reason why it hasn't been reported, why the media has stayed away from this, even though there's very clear evidence that he was compromised by the CCP, is so that they don't want to discredit Bannon. They don't want it to look like Bannon was compromised because they need Bannon to look like he was with Trump. And so I think that's really what's going on here. This is a huge bombshell. And um a, this is just such an illustration that we do not have good conservative independent media, investigative media. We don't have it. We just have a bunch of talking heads that repeat what they're told or are deeply compromised themselves and working against our interests, against Trump's interests, against the interests of the true conservative populist movement. So here we go. By October 2020, Steve Bannon, a private political advisor who had worked for the defendant's 2016 presidential campaign, began to assist with the defendant's reelection effort. 3 days before Election Day, Steve Bannon described the defendant's plan to a private gathering of supporters. So, that first sentence, he describes Steve Bannon as a private political advisor who had worked for Trump's 2016 campaign. So yeah, he did work for Trump's 2016 campaign. He was Trump's chief of staff, and then Trump fired his butt because he was a chaos agent within the White House. He was likely the source of leaks. He was a nightmare. And in his book, he defamed, and Steve Bannon's he wrote a book after that time where he wildly defamed and just aggressively defamed President Trump. Steve Bannon is not Trump's friend. As like he says he is. It's one of those things. Trump does what he can to with what he's got, and so he's got to work with these people because he's got a huge audience, and yeah, so he is not. Jack Smith is completely lying here. He's completely misinforming. I would say he is misleading. He's trying to suggest that Steve Bannon was representing Trump because his whole case is built on this. As you'll see, the video that he shares is just shocking. And I'm going to share that in just a second. So 3 days before Election Day, Steve Bannon described the president's plan. So now he's saying that this is the president's plan, even though it's coming only from Steve Bannon's mouth, right? So 3 days before Election Day, Steve Bannon described the president's plan, President Trump's plan, to a private gathering of supporters. And this is where he's outright lying because this is not President Trump's plan. This is Steve Bannon's plan. But he's doing this, I believe, because he had already been compromised by the CCP. And what Trump and this is and you'll see him say this. This is Steve Bannon's words. And what Trump's going to do is just declare victory, right? He's going to declare victory. That doesn't mean he's the winner. He's just going to say he's the winner. By the way, Biden did this election night too. He said, and by the way, we're going to win Pennsylvania. And they were down by 600,000 votes. Is part of what candidates do when it's close. They always, unless they're done and they think that they really didn't win. If it's super close, they're always going to say, "Yeah, we won." Like this is not a crime. After explaining that Biden supporters favored voting by mail, Steve Bannon stated further, and so they're going to have a natural disadvantage, and Trump's going to take advantage of it. That's our strategy. He's going to declare himself a winner. Immediately following Election Day on November 3rd, the defendant did exactly that. As his private and campaign advisors had predicted to him. So he's suggesting that uh, that Steve Bannon was a private and campaign advisor. In certain states, the defendant took an early lead on Election Day that began to erode. At approximately 11:20 p.m., Fox News projected that Biden would prevail in the state of Arizona, and according to campaign advisor P4, and I'm not sure who that one is, he and the defendant were shocked and angry at this development. And which I think we all were. Like it was very shocking because it was actually I think 11:20 p.m. I think that was East Coast time, and so this was 20 minutes after the polls closed in Arizona that they that Fox News before votes had even really been counted, and they they called Arizona for Trump or for Biden, and that was reckless. That was completely shocking and maddening and irresponsible. That was not journalism. That was electioneering. That was, that was something. It was wrong. Um, it should not have been called by them, and that was a huge indication that many of us had that something was seriously wrong. So, let's move on to Steve Bannon, shall we? Um, and to understand Steve Bannon, we first got to understand this guy's Miles Guo. So starting in, and I remember at that time I was watching Steve Bannon, and there was about 6 to 8 weeks that Steve Bannon just disappeared, and he was not on the show. And he said he was working on something, and it turned out he was, but he was working with Miles Guo for sure, and Miles Guo was a PLA agent. Miles Guo in English when he spoke in his very, very broken English. He talked about how evil the CCP was, and he continuously talked about how he was a he was running away from the CCP, that they were going after him, and he was wrongly persecuted by them, and he was their greatest enemy. In fact, he created what he called the new federal state of China that was going to replace the CCP. And they claimed that the I think it's Lai Baojing was the Chinese word for the normal people, the deplorables, and Trump called them, he talked, or not Trump, but Bannon talked about them all the time, talked about how he was talking to the Chinese people. And um, so this is an example. This right here, this is an image that Miles Guo shared a great deal. And it was a fake, completely fake and doctored image. He shared this image to pretend like he was close with Trump. And he took this image of Trump and Abe, the prime minister of Japan, and he put himself in it. And this is just, and he tweeted that. And that's now deleted here, as you can see. Um, that account no longer exists. This is from Solomon Yu. Solomon Yu, I had him on my show. And um, if you go back in the archives, I would say that the first thing that you should watch is the two-part episode that I did, the interviews that I did with Solomon Yu. It is absolutely fascinating, and we spent a couple hours in total going into much more depth on what I'm about to share. And he was an actual dissident from the Chinese Communist Party. He came over when he was a teenager because his life was threatened for speaking up in school against communism. And he ended up, his parents were able to get him out, get him in on a student exchange program of sorts to go to Alaska. And then he stayed in the United States and he became a citizen. He ended up um, uh, building a business, and then he got on the RNC for the state of Oregon. He was an RNC committee man. Sorry, he was an RNC committee man for 24 years for Oregon until he was just removed in an operation that I believe was led by the CCP through Don Powers, who there is. I've seen receipts that suggest that he owns a light bulb business where he's been getting light bulbs from China for pennies on the dollar, in a possible an alleged uh, scheme to pay him essentially under the table, largely to take out Solomon Yu. And he actually admitted as much that that was his whole goal for the last several years, Don Powers, to get rid of Solomon Yu from the RNC. But Solomon Yu, while he was on the RNC, one of the biggest things that he did was investigated the CCP, and he shut down many different infiltrations and that the CCP engaged in against the Republican Party, against Trump, and other Republican politicians in particular. This story right here in Mother Jones, and I know Mother Jones is a crazy communist rag, but it does share some things that, and the headline is a Chinese mogul who penetrated Trump world was investigated by FBI counterintelligence agents. And this right here in particular, and they have the receipts. Guo, or this is Miles Guo, or companies he controls paid Giuliani and Michael Flynn, Trump's former national security advisor, $50,000 each for speeches in 2021. Peter Navarro, a Trump White House aide, has also worked for a group, the New Federal State of China, that Guo and Bannon set up. Now, when I heard all this, because I was listening in real time to all of this stuff as it was happening on Steve Bannon's show, and I really liked Miles Guo. I thought that what he had to say was really inspiring. In fact, I thought that for several weeks during COVID, every Saturday on his show, Steve Bannon would have on uh, different dissidents of the CCP, and many of them were anonymous, and they spoke either with an interpreter or in broken English, and so you had to listen to it slow. I couldn't listen to that at 2.5 times speed. But those stories that they told were incredible, and they said that living under that communist regime, the most important thing that you have to continuously discipline yourself to do is to remind yourself of what is true, because there's so much disinformation all around you. And that really applies today. It really applies. I thought that was some of the best radio that I'd ever heard, what Steve Bannon was doing then. And I really liked Miles Guo. But then, so the interviews that I did with Solomon were deeply shocking to me. And one of the things that he shared, and he said that he discovered that Miles Guo was a PLA agent. There are in those interviews, there's a lot more evidence. He's got images of that really proved that he was a PLA agent, the People's Liberation Army, that he was an agent of the PLA. He had these 24 karat gold um, lapel pins for the PLA in his apartment. And the reason why Miles Guo realized that he was a CCP agent is because he started listening to his Chinese language broadcasts that were being showed in China. And there are many of them, but here's just one example.
还有一个就是说，我希望还能有机会啊，为国家效力，还有机会推行我的国际。
All right. So, first thing he says is, one more thing. I sincerely hope that I can work for my country. And then he says, to promote my ideas, to serve under President Xi, to contribute to President Xi's China dream, and some great mighty works. This is from the bottom of my heart. And so he said these things all the time in Chinese radio. He was saying things along the lines of that he was, he was working to deceive the American public and these gullible Americans. And, so he is now, I believe he's in prison. He was convicted of money laundering and running essentially a Ponzi scheme, stealing from his investors, and generally he was not who he was. And it's interesting that this whole story about him being a CCP agent that compromised a huge part of the right, including Steve Bannon, Peter Navarro, and Giuliani. This is just huge, and nobody's talking about it. Nobody seems to know about it. The media has really kept that under the rug, and I believe it's because of this Jack Smith filing that just came out. Because if conservatives knew that Steve Bannon was compromised by the CCP, then you wouldn't be able to make that connection. And the reality is that you can't make that connection anyways, that he's trying to make, saying that Steve Bannon's actually working on behalf of Trump. So take a look now at this piece of propaganda that the Jack Smith is pointing to in his filings. It says the Steve Bannon tapes. A Bannon tape from October 31st, 2020, in which he describes how Trump would claim victory on election night, regardless of where the vote count stood.
And what Trump's going to do is just declare victory, right? He's going to declare victory. But that doesn't mean he's the winner. He's just going to say he's the winner.
Frankly, we did win this election.
The Democrats.
So that was on election night, right? And so they're intersplicing this, saying that this is what they're just trying to prove this connection to the court, that what Steve Bannon is saying is actually what Trump said. He wouldn't have to do this. Jack Smith wouldn't have to do this had Trump actually done this.
more of our people vote early that count. Theirs voted mail. And so they're going to have a natural disadvantage, and Trump's going to take advantage of it. That's our strategy. He's going to declare himself a winner. So when you wake up Wednesday morning, it's going to be a firestorm.
Because we're going to go in the night of, as soon as that election's over, we're going in with our lawyers.
We're going to have Antifa crazy, the media crazy, the courts are crazy, and Trump's going to be sitting there mocking, tweeting shit out, you lose. All hell is going.
Okay, so I mean, this is just so clearly psychological operation here from the left and from Jack Smith. So now he's talking about, this is from January 5th. This is from Steve Bannon's War Room podcast on January 5th.
To break loose tomorrow. Just understand this. All hell is going to break loose tomorrow. It's going to be moving. It's going to be quick. This is not a day for fantasy. This is a day for maniacal focus. Focus, focus, focus. We're coming in right over the target, okay? Exactly. This is the point of attack we always want.
It's going to happen like you think it's going to happen, okay? It's going to be quite extraordinarily different. And all I can say is strap in. You have made this happen, and tomorrow it's game day.
So Donald Trump chose January 6th because he knew the Congress would be meeting in the Capitol.
It's pretty clear that what they wanted was to stop the certification of the election.
And we're going to have to fight much harder. We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down to the Capitol.
Of course, they selectively edit out where he said we're going to walk peacefully and patriotically. And so, you know, this is all just very, very heavy-handed propaganda. So then October 21st, 22, it says a federal judge has sentenced Steve Bannon to 4 months in jail for defying a subpoena from lawmakers investigating the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol. You know, what's interesting is the way that he puts the date here, Jack Smith, he's from Europe, and this is the European standard. So he puts the day, then the month, then the year. That's the European means of marking the date. This isn't even an American that did this, you know, it's just, 2 years after the January 6th insurrection, Bannon was instrumental in the Brazilian attack on democracy. So they're saying that this is an attack on democracy in Brazil, where there's tremendous evidence that there was a fraud in Brazil. And so he's connecting the two.
The scene looks strikingly similar to the January 6, 2021 insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. The circumstances that led up to this chaos, quite similar as well.
So now he's trying to tie Steve Bannon into this thing that Steve Bannon and other allies of Trump have falsely claimed the Brazilian elections were fraudulent. So he's defending Jack Smith, even defending Brazil's elections and their absolute tyranny, where conservative, you know, the equivalent of even people like Fox News have had to flee the country, and the equivalent of people like Tucker Carlson have had to flee the country because if not, they knew they were going to prison. They have imprisoned many people just for speaking out against what they're doing. And that is what Jack Smith clearly wants. He wants that, what they have in Brazil, that's perfect. That's good. That's what they're doing here. So yeah, so that is where we're at. And I hope this is helpful. I think that we're looking at a really difficult time for this country. And I think that, you know, the idea that Bannon is compromised and working on the wrong side, it was difficult for me to swallow. I stepped away from him. It was around 22. I actually decided that I needed to take a break from politics altogether for an extended period of time. I was going through some difficult times with my family, and so I just stepped away from politics for an extended period of time, and I never went back to Steve Bannon. And there was a sense of reclaiming my thinking and this clarity that came after I removed myself from that. And I actually, you know, I think that his imprisonment is absolutely wrong. He went to prison, I think the beginning of June, no, the beginning of July for 4 months. I'm not sure. I don't think he's going to get out until after the election, maybe slightly before. They might bring him out before so that he can try to help uh, incite some sort of new J6. So they may very well may let him out a week before the election. If they do, I think that's probably part of their intention. I think that they have inadvertently, in my opinion, helped Trump by taking Bannon out of the picture. That it has has put more of a burden on Flynn to carry the load of inciting people on himself. I want to put this is before he went to prison, and this is something I've talked about a little bit, but it's important because this shows the same exact thing going on now. So Steve Bannon was very much involved in this whole operation to infiltrate state parties, state Republican parties, and I've talked about that quite a bit. On February 6th, 2021 was a very key day in this whole operation against state parties. That was the day that Steve Bannon had Dan Schultz on his show. The lieutenants in many of these states of this insurgent operation cite that day, that podcast episode, as being one of the things that really motivated them and inspired them to do what they have done within state parties. And they were very clearly running an operation. And I've shown a lot of quotes that have shown that in the past, but that is what the whole idea behind that resulted in this was this false idea that the job of the precinct delegate, precinct committeeman, precinct captain, whatever it is in your state, that's the lowest level position within the state or county or district parties on the precinct level, that position is a position of rights, not responsibilities. And it's the position Dan Schultz to this day. I saw him just last week on an X Space or a live stream that was held by Royce White, who's running for Senate in Minnesota, also very connected with Steve Bannon, that Steve Bannon really launched his political career. And so Royce White actually had Dan Schultz, and which was a big audience for Dan Schultz, because Dan Schultz his audience is really diminished because he's not a very good speaker. He's not a very good presenter, but he's talking about on this Royce White show, he's talking about how he describes the whole power structure of the Republican Party and how the RNC is at the top. You got the RNC chair, you got the RNC, the body, the 168, which is all of the RNC committeemen and women and the state party chairs. Then you've got the state party chairs and the state executive team, and then you've got this executive committee that's under them, and then you've got the district and county committees, and then you have the precinct delegates. And he's saying, and here's the dirty secret that none of them wants you to know, it's all inverted. The precinct delegate is actually on top. The precinct committeeman has all of the power within the party, and all we need to do is fill those spots and take all the power and take the party back, and then the people can run the party. And it's so absurd. I mean, if you think about the Republican Party, do you want the Republican Party run by a bunch of people who don't know what they're doing, but want to be revolutionaries? Or do you want the party run by people who know how to raise money and win elections for Republicans? I'd way rather have the party run by people who know how to raise money and win elections for Republicans, because the alternative, and what we've seen, is that when these people who are largely lunatics, the leaders, they restrict the flow of information to their followers. They prevent them from having access to information about what it really is to be, what the work of a precinct delegate really is. I apologize if you hear my dog barking, but they restrict information flow so that they can't hear any sort of competing arguments about, what the party should be about. They want their followers to believe absolutely that what they say about every other Republican that doesn't ascribe to their cult, and it is a military intelligence cult that they have created, and pseudo-religious military intelligence cult, and that claims to be Christians. They usually claim to be the only Christians within the party, in fact, which is absurd, even as they espouse complete and total hatred of other Republicans more than Democrats, and everything they do is to try to hurt Republicans that don't belong and bow the knee to their cult. And they are in Arizona right now, as I've talked about before. They are working actively to flip the state legislature blue. That is their priority, and they're talking almost exclusively about hand counting ballots instead of getting out the vote. They're training people how to hand count ballots. In Florida, it's the same way. The Flynn cults within the Florida Republican Party and Florida Republican Assembly and these Trump clubs, they call them Trump clubs, but really they're Flynn clubs. They are not doing any get out the vote. They absolutely do not recommend voting early. They only are what they're doing exclusively between now and the election is teaching people how to hand count ballots so that they can be prepared for the black swan event that Flynn promises is coming, which proves that it's not a black swan event because the definition of a black swan event is something that nobody knows is coming. But Flynn knows. So, Flynn says it's coming. So everybody needs to be hand counting ballots so that they are prepared for if the power's out or whatever. Or if the laws somehow miraculously change, or they have some successful French Revolution style uprising on a precinct by precinct and county by county level in order to try to change the rules for the election, which would be completely unconstitutional. And the media and the Democrats and most Americans would rightfully believe and see that as a coup. And it would be. It would be. I mean, that's not a constitutional method for changing our laws, and yet these people call themselves constitutionalists. So all of that started, and Steve Bannon bears a tremendous, tremendous responsibility for this. I don't know what Steve Bannon's thinking is. I think that he is largely in it for himself. I think he's very motivated by his own personal financial gain and profit. I think that he's right about a lot of things, just as many of the things that Flynn says are right. But I don't think that any of what Flynn says he actually believes. But and I think that Bannon probably believes more of what he says. But yeah, I think that we just need to be very careful who we listen to. And that's really the moral of the story. You don't need to take my word for it. I would say do listen to what Solomon Yu has to say, and I'll post links to that show in my show notes. And you know what? I just decided so Monday and Wednesday, I'm going to repost those so that you don't have to be a paid subscriber in order to watch them, because those are some very important episodes. So I will repost those that'll be the shows for Monday and Wednesday. And I would say there's a lot to look forward there. They were really, really tremendous interviews. He is an amazing man. And I was so blessed to be able to interview him. And I think you'll be blessed to hear it. So, so that we will leave it at that. And I'll provide, actually, I have this here since I've got it on my little docket here. I will add this video, which is a current example that just further shows this pattern with Steve Bannon in particular. And the backstory to this video before I share it, so you know what you're seeing, is this is Steve Bannon on his show in June. So before he went to prison, about a month before he went to prison. And he's talking about Mike Johnson. And this is on the heels of an event that was held by and organized by Russ Vogt. Now, Russ Vogt is he's been very close. He was on Bannon's show all the time. And he is a very articulate, clear thinking, far right conservative, very much involved, a very good speaker, and he's very persuasive. But he's kind of the ideological priest, not the religious priest, but kind of the political ideological priest for the Freedom Caucus, for the Matt Gaetz and the Marjorie Taylor Greens and all those. So he held an event, I believe it was in South Carolina, and I think it was the week before, or maybe even the same week. I think it was the week before President Trump's spring event that he held at Mar-a-Lago. That was kind of the kickoff of his, this is the campaign's really starting now. And that was I want to say it was the beginning of June, the very beginning of June. And so this event that Russ Vogt organized was the headline, the keynote speakers were Steve Bannon, and then all the Freedom Caucus people from the House. I believe it was Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, probably Paul Gosar, probably Andy Biggs, but it was the Freedom Caucus type people. I know for sure Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, probably Boebert, Anna Paulina Luna, all of those people. And immediately after, so that was a weekend event. On that Monday, that's when these attacks on Mike Johnson started to just explode. And it was very coordinated. They were disseminated very aggressively by the Flynn network of independent podcasters that I've talked about a lot. But Steve Bannon was very much involved, very, very heavily involved in that whole thing. And so was Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz. They were actively working to try to get rid of Mike Johnson as speaker. And had they succeeded with that, the outcome would have very clearly been Hakeem Jeffries becoming the speaker, and it would have resulted in a takeout attempt on Trump. They would have, what I believed at that time is that this was timed in such a way that it was going to result in secretaries of state, Hakeem Jeffries becoming speaker a week or two before the National Republican Convention, and speakers or secretaries of state then declaring that they were going to remove Trump from the ballot in timing and in coordination with Hakeem Jeffries passing some sort of a House resolution stating that Trump committed an act of insurrection on January 6th. And when that goes back to the Supreme Court case, when the Supreme Court decided after the Colorado Secretary of State just declared unilaterally that it was an insurrection, and therefore she had the justification, constitutional right to take Trump off the ballot in Colorado. Supreme Court heard that, and in part, their ruling said one person alone can't decide what an insurrection is. That would take an act of Congress. So a resolution like that could have potentially provided the justification. That's what I was arguing at the time. But this right here just shows, and Steve Bannon every single day on his show was attacking Mike Johnson, but this is one of the most egregious ones.
You're prepared. If other people are prepared to take it, then go ahead and take it. I don't have to, and I'm not. Because I see a good man being destroyed. A good man who came back to lead us to victory and beat all the people they put up. No, he's not doing a good job. He's not doing a good job defending you, and he's doing a worse job of defending this nation, and therefore he must go. And I don't care if it risks Hakeem Jeffries. Hakeem Jeffries runs the place anyway. Don't take it from me. Read the Politico puff piece.
Okay, so he just said, we've got to get rid of Mike Johnson. I don't care if that makes Hakeem Jeffries the speaker. That's what he was working on. This was an effort, even then, that was kind of the first effort to take out Trump. This was before they attempted the assassination. When this didn't work, and when the Supreme Court ruled in such a way that resulted in Trump not getting sentenced and his sentencing being delayed on his conviction for the stupid hush money trial in New York, then all those things fell apart. Those initial takeout efforts against Trump fell apart. And Bannon was involved in that here very clearly. Then they had to go on to the next stage, which was to attempt his assassination. And so we know where we are now. So again, it's only October 3rd. We've had already a bunch of surprises in the first 3 days of the month, and there's going to be a lot more October surprises to come. And I will be checking in frequently on X next week at Bigger Truth, and I'll post what I can. I'm going to try to get a recording, at least one from my presentations in Oklahoma, and see if we can post something here then. But Monday and Wednesday, I will pre-plan the shows being a re-release of those interviews with Solomon Yu, and I think that will be a serious blessing to you, as they were to me. So thank you very much. I appreciate all your support. Get over to the Bigger Truth Substack, biggertruth.substack.com. I've got a lot of value for you there. Thank you.